So you're able to see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. This is where we continue, right? Page 43, comma. We finished and caught up to Avatar, so we continue from here, correct?
43, then 49, yeah. Spiritual gems.
No, I think we'll just go all the way. I think this is relevant. So we'll keep going now all the way. It's just another 40 pages. And
Okay.
it's not heavy stuff, so we'll just, we don't need to, unless there's something interesting or hard to discuss, we can keep going. But I think this is very useful. It's the guide for the textbook, so. Right? Okay, so let's get started, 7:31. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
Jai.
The equation of body and soul. As a rule, we equate one body with one soul. The equation of one body implying one soul holds true, particularly in the higher stages of evolution. However, the exceptions to this general rule are also interesting and noteworthy. In the frequent cases of obsessions we have, an example of one and the same physical body being used alternately by different souls. Some departed spirit or spirits can occasionally take possession of the gross body of an incarnate soul and try to use it for obtaining experiences of the gross world. When this happens too often, the general equation of one body with one soul is seriously disturbed. We have here only one gross body, but many souls who are using it in succession or alternation. Just as one body can get linked up with many souls, one soul can get linked up with many bodies. There are group souls. Each group soul gets linked up with numberless physical forms, as in the case of blades of grass. When the group soul gets more advanced in consciousness, then it can get connected with one form instead of with numerous forms. Group souls are an exception to the one body, one soul equation. But whether souls come under this equation or fall outside of it, their externality is due to imagined separateness. Even a group soul is external to another group soul in the inner spheres and is as illusory as any other separative soul. In truth, there is only one cosmic soul which gathers experience through all the different forms, sometimes appearing to separate itself into group souls and at other times into souls which come under the body-soul equation. Group souls imply a one soul, many bodies relationship, which is the opposite of the many souls, one body relationship found in obsessions and possessions. However, cases presumed to be of the many souls, one body relationship frequently turn out to be instances of split personality. They are not exceptions to the one body, one soul equation. In split personality, some dissociated nexus from the psyche of the same soul gets possession of its body and seeks separate and exclusive expression. It is not another soul or spirit, but another group of impressions, samskaras, of the same soul or spirit. In split personality, each homogeneous nexus of the psyche takes possession of the body for some time to make room for other nexuses of this or previous incarnations. These other nexuses are qualitatively different and are incapable of being accommodated in the first nexus. So they seek alternate expression instead of simultaneous adjustments. In the realm of literature, a famous example of dual personality is that of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is an example of two sections of the mind dominating one body and not of two souls getting linked up with it. However, it remains true that in some instances, two or more souls can use the same body. When this happens, there is generally an alternation between their regimes. Simultaneous use of the same body by different souls comes under a special exception where the different souls have to be in perfect harmony with each other. The harmony between the souls has to be so complete that one and the same bodily action or experience equally meets the needs of all the souls concerned. Some advanced disciples are in such complete harmony with the master that the master can, if he so wills, sometimes overshadow the ego mind and the body of a disciple without supplanting his soul. Such overshadowing may take place for the working out of the wider plans of the master, instead of replacing or wiping out the individuality of the disciple. It implements and amplifies his individuality. Here, the disciple and his master are so merged into each other that they both find equal fulfillment through whatever the disciple achieves through his bodily existence. Since the one body, one soul equation can have so many exceptions, the question of determining the number of souls in existence becomes complicated. There is another aspect to this question which lifts it beyond the ken of any need for enumeration. The number of souls from this point of view is infinite. There is one infinite indivisible soul through illusion appears as many separate souls. Just as the one real soul is infinite in its indivisible being, the many souls into which it appears to get split are infinite in number. The shadow of the infinite is infinite and remains infinite. Though the number of souls who attain full or human consciousness is limited and growing, the total number of souls of all plants, animals, insects, atoms, etc. is infinite and cannot be counted. This is interesting. He says the soul can be counted at the level of atom. So I've been thinking of stone form and gaseous form as each gas as one, but then you're talking about atoms, mind-boggling.
And also one more thing, the sentence, the shadow of the soul
is infinite.
The shadow of the infinite is infinite, and remains finite.
Yeah.
So this is the Maya, shadow of the infinite.
Yeah. When we say that the number of souls in the universe remains infinite, this does not mean that it is constant. It remains the same only in the sense of remaining infinite and not in the sense of barring creation of new or fresh souls. The number of human conscious souls is not to be judged or arrived at by a census of living human bodies which dwell in the gross world at any one time. There are ever so many human conscious souls who have just passed away or who are waiting to be born. Of course, the number of those souls who are freed from the round of births and deaths is very limited compared with the number of those who are caught up in it. Which groups of souls will incarnate in a specific period or cycle, and in what manner they are accommodated so as to allow scope for their evolution, are all matters governed by the masters who represent the divine will. The example of shifts working by day and night in factories is appropriate in this context. It indicates the many ways in which complex adjustments can be made to provide for the spiritual evolution of one and all. Even the exceptions to the one body, one soul equation are only parts of adjustments which ultimately serve the divine will. Okay, go to spiritual jingoism. In no sphere of life is jingoism more rampant than in the fields of spirituality. As in the market of economic goods, so also in the realm of spirituality, there is the inexorable law of demand and supply. The whole world is pining for light and freedom. To meet this recurrent and poignant demand, there always arises a plentiful supply of those who claim to meet it adequately. Most of the claimants are imposters. Those who can meet the demand adequately are extremely rare. Extremely rare are those persons who can either recognize or profit by the true claimant. Among the seekers, there are two categories: those who are sincerely struggling with their backs to the walls and those who pretend to seek. Those who pretend to seek and those who pretend to give are close kin in the bewildering realm of spiritual jingoism. Of course, the pretended seeker and the pretentious saint may become closeted in the arena of life and play, their game in the wilderness of the world through selfish motives. Then, as Kabir has said, they both sink in the waters like a boat made out of stone. They have jointly invited their watery grave through selfish aims. In this world of innumerable frailties, the greatest of all frailties is the common fault of not being able to face, accept, and acknowledge one's own weaknesses. This is the frailty of all frailties. It gives rise to hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is said to be the tribute which vice pays to virtue. In contrast with the world of facts, man builds out of his inspired imagination another world of ideals. Sometimes he imaginatively transports himself into the world of ideals. Sometimes he reverts to his realistic world of facts. And occasionally he tries to bridge the gulf between them by actually and laboriously traversing the path with slow and bleeding steps. The temptation to seize the ideal imaginatively and pose as having realized it is so irresistible that there are very few who do not succumb to it. This is the origin of the fraudulent saint or the spiritual jingo who walks and talks with his nose in the air and arms akimbo as if he were somebody very special. Among the claimants for spirituality, there are very few who sincerely believe in their own claim and then take their stand by it. Most of them are self-deceived. Such persons deceive themselves before they start deceiving others. But even if they are thoroughly self-deceived, they can wriggle their way out from the tentacles of spiritual jingoism as soon as they discover that they had overestimated their own spiritual achievements. There is a faint ray of hope for their coming around to the truth because they are not consciously dishonest. On the other hand, conscious and deliberate impostors in the field of spirituality are at once the most confirmed culprits and the most piteous victims. They get stuck deeper and deeper in the quagmire of their own creation until everyone, including themselves, loses all hope of their redemption. It is of no use to attribute motives to the conscious impostor or fraudulent claimant of spirituality. The inner spiritual path is narrow and difficult. Even sincere seekers can become enticed by the allurements of spiritual jingoism before they become aware that they have fallen. But they may have the advantage of a timely beacon light flashed forth by some perfect master. The line dividing the true from the false on the steep path to truth is so narrow that it has also almost no dimensions. Let us put the most charitable construction upon spiritual jingoism. It can entice even sincere souls who fail to be constantly alert on the path. The process of realization appears to be a process of becoming what one apparently is not. It seems like a movement from where you are to where you are not. To give conscious directions to this process, to give conscious direction to this process, it is necessary not only to have a perception of the goal, but also to dramatize our transport to it in imagination. For example, a person who wishes to go to London makes preparations after visualizing all the vicissitudes of the journey. To this inevitable process, we must add the consideration that the realistic position where he is actually stationed is itself a creation of his own imagination. It is very natural for a person to take imagination for reality and to believe that he has realized in his search what he has only imagined. There are some assumptions and presumptions which necessarily attend upon the divine speculation to which each seeker is inevitably drawn. All search is a struggle to arise from the false to the real. No struggle is possible unless the seeker has some initial idea, right or wrong, about the real. Further, the false cannot eternally take its stand upon the false and patently and wantonly cling to itself and remain itself endlessly. Thus arises the imperative need to visualize truth, to take one stand on this imagined or perceived truth, and to act as if one has realized this cherished goal of search. This also implies a belief that one has realized it, although again and again one will be rudely shaken out of this belief by having to face the unchallengeable facts that overtake one in one's imaginative race. A sincere belief, no matter how false, does not change the seeker irredeemably because he is open to correction. However, the person who knowingly and deliberately plays a false role is potentially airing claims for which he has no authority. He is inviting a spiritual doom for himself by yielding to patent illicitness. He embraces his boastful jingoism in order to exploit the simple credulity of others. The first person sincerely, albeit falsely, believes in his own spiritual credentials. The other fraudulently and knowingly poses as what he inwardly knows himself not to be, far from veritable truth. The difference is tremendous. The former is confirming in perceived truth, whereas the latter is confirming his being in perceived falseness. The conscious impostor in spiritual jingoism therefore condemns himself to a self-created shadowy destiny of piling sins, quite apart from dragging all the other credulous souls into the slippery quagmire of his own creation. He is spiritually burying himself and all who in their childlike simplicity have loved him and put their faith in him. The jingo invites this doom upon himself and others who have loved him. He cannot escape it except through an act of special grace from some perfect master. The most tragic fact in the situation is that the impostor does not deserve such grace, which alone can save him. Very brutal in explaining what is happening all over the world. I think all of us might have encountered one or many instances of spiritual jingoism in our spiritual shopping. So, evil.
And also one comment that in the discourses it has mentioned that when the spiritual aspirants follow false gurus, then the bad sanskaras of the guru also gets transmuted in a way. So it's a very dangerous game because I can vouch for it. I've had many experiences because when I was doing spiritual shopping, and I think the best way to go about anybody who's seeking God or looking for a guru is, I think Baba has also said, whatever religion you're born in, you focus on that avatar or Sadguru that you know. And when the time is right, the teacher will come. The saying, the teacher comes when the student is ready, is correct. So there is no point of going around looking for gurus. My definition of a guru and a teacher is a good teacher, authentic teacher is also on the path on a different plane of consciousness, on a higher plane of consciousness. And Baba said they can only take you up to their level. So the best form of guru or somebody who, is to focus on, is to wait for it to happen, or to focus on the religion you're born in, whether you're Christian, Jesus, Buddha, Rama, Krishna, whatever, so so it's very, and I've noticed actually in my life, people who have followed false gurus have had downfalls. They have got mentally disturbed. Jai Baba.
True. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, Jai Baba. Actually, I had read somewhere that these false gurus are completely false, and to some extent, they are in some kind of delusion, and they know that they are false. But the followers who follow them with a pure mind and heart are some don't really get into that false realm, and they are saved by a perfect master or by God. I mean, in that way, in that sense.
Very good. That's reassuring.
Yeah,
But
because I don't know, I read this somewhere because they said that, see, after all, the guy who's a follower probably he's doing it out of not always true, but out of purity of his soul and mind. He doesn't know that the master he's following is a false guru. So that guy is the one, the guru is the one who really falls and can be, he can be turned into stone or whichever, as from that realm. But his I mean, his followers don't really always get that hurt because of their being honest and truthful to some extent.
good point. It sounds very reasonable in, in the larger in the pyramid of laws. What you're saying is more reasonable than blaming even the disciples. So I hope that that's the way. And I think the other thing is, when the master is when the disciple is ready and the master comes to you, you will get tens of hints. You will get tens of knocks on the head to confirm it. So there's no ambiguity to it. So you can
Yeah,
get drawn to multiple in your spiritual shopping journey. You can get, I mean, all of us are personal experience
true,
with this,
true.
right? So we have been through this. But I'm just saying, he just knocks it and reminds you and binds you with so many uh, uh, very loud hints that you can't make a mistake. But then you'll have to wait for that, and you'll have to keep at it till you get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's continue with evil as a relic. Good as well as evil are impressional products of the evolutionary momentum. They come into conflict with each other, and as such are to be recognized as separate groups of forces. Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub, each in his own way, symbolizes the forces of evil. However, it is a mistake to think that evil is a irreducible active force by itself. Both good and evil are abstractions and have to be seen in their true perspective as inevitable phases in the subhuman and human evolution. Evil is the lingering relic of earlier good. Some impressional tendencies, which were necessary and inevitable at a particular phase, are carried over to the higher phase of evolution, and they persist in their existence due to inertia. They hinder harmonious functioning in the new context and appear as evil. Good as well as evil have an undeniable relationship with the circumstances. No judgment can be passed on the goodness of any action without considering the concrete context in which the judgment is called for. An act which is normally undeniably evil may, under special circumstances, be not only defensible but praiseworthy. Take, for example, an exceptional case. Suppose a mother has given birth to a baby and has not her own milk to feed it. The baby has to be fed on cow's milk, which is very difficult to obtain. A neighbor may have some cow's milk, but the mother knows that he will not part with it for money or for any philanthropic consideration, even though he does not need it for himself. Under such circumstances, if a person steals the cow's milk and feeds it to the newborn baby in order to keep it alive, the act of stealing is in this case not only justifiable, but definitely good. Of course, an exception of this type does not make stealing a good act under all circumstances. Normally, stealing continues to be evil, but in the exceptional case above it, and in the exceptional case above, it has become good. The illustration proves how considerations of good or evil must, in their very nature, be dependent upon circumstances in all the variety of detail which obtains in concrete situations. Good is relative to a concrete context of actual circumstances, and so is evil. But for many practical purposes, certain trends of action have to be classified as good, while other trends of action have to be classified as evil. Everything happens according to divine will, and it is a mistake to think that God has a rival in the form of a devil. Accentuation of the forces for good is necessary for releasing divine life in all its fullness. But evil itself often plays an important part in accentuating the forces for good, and it becomes an inevitable shadow or counterpart of the good. Like other opposites of experience, good and evil are also, in a sense, opposites which have to be withstood and transcended. One has to rise above the duality of good and evil and accept life in its totality, in which they appear as abstractions. Life is to be seen and lived in its indivisible integrity. Nevertheless, there is an important factor in the opposites of good and evil. Evil is to all appearance the converse of good, yet at the same time it is capable of being converted into good. Thus, generally speaking, the path lies from evil to good and then from good to God, who is beyond both good and evil. If any suffering comes to a perfect master or avatar, it should not be interpreted as a temporary victory of evil. It happens by divine will and is a form of divine compassion. He voluntarily takes upon himself the suffering of others in order to redeem those who are engulfed in gnawing cravings, unrelieved hatred, and unabated jealousies. The calculus of opposites. Spiritual unfoldment takes place through experience of such opposites as pleasure and pain, success and failure, virtue and vice. Both extremes are equally necessary for the fulfillment of life, although they appear to be direct opposites of each other. In fact, from a larger point of view, the opposites of experience turn out to be complementaries rather than contraries. They appear to be clashing incompatibles only for the mind that cannot transcend them. They are like diametrically opposite points on the circumference of a circle. If you pursue any point on the circumference, the path it the if you pursue any point on the circumference, the path through it will necessarily lead to its diametrically opposite point. And the path from this opposite point again returns to the starting point. Movement between the opposites is as endless as movement in a circle. The law of opposites does not imply an exact mathematical polarity. Opposites are not antipodes with point-to-point contrariety in every detail. Take, for example, the first air pilots who experienced failure and death in their undertakings. This failure cannot be said to be the exact opposite of their previous success in flying, for they never had any success in flying. Of what then it is the opposite? These first air pilots may have experienced success in some similar endeavor of a slightly different type, and their failure in flying, culminating in death, is the qualitative opposite of that experience of success. It's a profound point. The opposites of failure and success need each other. There can be no success unless there is failure, and it is equally true that there can be no failure unless there is success. If one has never succeeded in a particular thing, it is meaningless to style such attempts or their results as failure. In the same way, success is success only if there have been prior failures, either by that particular person or by others who tried in the same field. Success and failure are generally measured, appreciated, or suffered more in relation to what has been achieved in the same field by others than in relation to a target which has been hit or missed. If it is usual for any person to do a particular thing, the doing of it is not to be regarded as a success, although it is success in the sense that what was planned has been achieved. In every worldly sphere, there is bad, worse, and worst, as well as good, better, and best. There is a conscious or unconscious racing with each other, as well as a perception of that which is beyond all racing. It is out of this racing that success or failure arises. If success and failure become independent of their accentuation by the felt duality of others, they become something entirely different from what they generally are. The severity of their contrariety is very considerably mitigated and they gradually get amalgamated. For example, the persons who fail to reach the top of the Everest before its first conqueror will be seen not to have failed, but to have succeeded in getting near the peak, unless success happens to be a name not for the entire process of climbing, but only for the last step which the first conqueror took. The more our perception is free from clouding and the less vitiated it is by felt duality, the less contrariety or incompatibility exists between the extremes or opposites of experience. In the final, undimmed perception, there is neither success nor failure, for there is nothing to gain or lose. However, until this unfailing self assurance is permanently established, one is inevitably engaged in the illusion of duality or relatively false values. Then there always are approximations towards a receding target, and these approximations may be called either partial failure or partial success according to one's own point of view. This also shows how every success implies a failure and every failure a success. The two opposites tread upon each other in the world of illusion. One who can withstand both success and failure with equanimity is nearing a truer appreciation of both. And for one who goes beyond the extremes or opposites, the question of withstanding either does not arise. However, both opposites are unavoidable during the process of evolution. Evolutionary illusion or illusory evolution has to proceed through apparently incompatible opposites such as pleasure and pain, vice and virtue, success and failure. Of the many pairs of opposites, the pair which needs especial mention are the mention and consideration is that of man and woman. Male and female human forms are rightly described as opposite sexes. Progressive realization of the adequate forms, the continuation of the species, and the onward march of the incarnated life stream are dependent upon the opposition and interplay of the sexes, particularly at the higher phases of biological evolution. This is equally true of psychological and spiritual evolution as long as it is held up in the domain of illusion. The opposition of sexes and the alternative attempts to overcome or reconcile this opposition are admittedly a source of inspiration, sublimation, and exasperation, which haunt the interplay of sex opposites at the psychic level until they are withstood or understood fully and adequately. One special feature of the sex opposites is that while remaining in counterbalancing opposition to each other, they are more patently and firmly tethered to each other than many other opposites. A man who is conscious of himself as a male is at the same time conscious of woman as a female, and the tension of the felt duality is on him a constant burden which he often invisibly passes on to a member of the opposite sex. The same is true of a woman who is particularly conscious of herself as a female. The opposites create and sustain a burdensome illusion which is transferred to each other. And if this illusion is shared by both, it goes on increasing in geometrical proportion instead of being mitigated in any way. On the other hand, the disburdening of the illusory and oppositional duality of sex is also a self-communicative understanding. Then love is gradually freed from the tinge of differentiative sex consciousness, and understanding is lifted out of the obsessiveness of one of the most oppressive forms of duality. If one experience is an exact antithetic of another, they counterbalance each other. But very often, an exact antithesis is not necessary for such counterbalancing. Suppose B is directly the reverse of A in every detail. Here, B can counterbalance A, but the onward unfolding of the purpose of life is equally served if something similar to A counterbalances B, or something similar to B counterbalances A, or something similar to A counterbalances something similar to B, and vice versa. In other words, the law of opposites is not a mechanical law of action and reaction, but is a significant search through complementary fractional experiences. The complicated manner in which one opposite invites and attracts its supplementary opposite may be illustrated through another example. Suppose a person finds himself forced to kill others, as often happens in wars. Here, his destructive disposition is being accentuated and released without the approval of his innermost being. One day, this person inwardly revolts against such a type of action and tries to repress his destructive disposition to kill. However, the destructive disposition cannot be so easily halted since it has been too much accentuated through repeated practice. So his disposition recoils on himself and he commits suicide. He has invited upon himself this opposite consisting of being killed. This is partly due to his wanting to escape from having to kill others against his will, and partly to his wanting to expiate for having killed others against his will, but mostly it is due to his being hopelessly caught up in the momentum of a destructive disposition which demands expression on some object, whether it be someone else or himself. The working out of the law of opposites is beyond the limited intellect. In the above example, another point is clarified. If an action does not have the wholehearted support of the innermost being of a person, it is quick in inviting its opposite. If, however, an action has had the wholehearted support of the innermost being, it can evade deflection as long as it does not gather in its train some other things which strike a note of discord within the innermost being. The way to transcend the alternation between fractional opposites is to steer one's life so as to make it a true and complete expression of the innermost being. Nevertheless, until the entire accumulated self of a person comes into complete harmony with the one divine self within, the law of opposites inevitably comes to this help, whether he consciously wants it or not. Suppose a person kills sick animals out of what he regards as compassion for them, that is, with the intention of giving them relief from suffering. His innermost being does not sanction this apparent act of compassion, since he would not like that sort of compassion to be expressed towards him if he were ill. This implicit acknowledgement of cruelty involved in killing animals is sufficient to necessitate his having to become in some life a shepherd or a cowherd or a herder of the animal kingdom. Very similar is the case of one who keeps hens awake all night in order that they should lay more eggs, not realizing the carelessness involved in it. In the world of plants also, one may inadvertently or deliberately cause wanton destruction only to attract to himself the role of a horticulturist or a gardener. The harm which one may have inadvertently or deliberately have done to any living beings has to be made good. In a future incarnation, he has to nourish and protect those very souls in some other form, either as a kind head of a family or a wise ruler. The law of opposites does not function through arithmetical or mechanical calculus, but through the requirements of karmic adjustments and a supreme need for full and free unfolding of life in every form. Alternation between the palatable and unpalatable opposites is a game of seesaw which must continue until arrival at a dynamic poise, which is beyond the opposites and which is the unhampered expression of the unalloyed eternal. It's a very, very interesting chapter. I was struggling with understanding this opposites. If you recollect in God Speaks, then I did some research, and this is very, very clear on what this opposite expressions versus our traditional understanding, or at least my traditional understanding of karma, right? So I think the example of the circle is beautiful. It's just fantastic. The points on the circle, that gives you a clarity of what this interplay of opposites which plays out everywhere. And next most powerful example of opposites that Baba brings out is the sexes. We have completely opposite sexes, and we have opposite ideas of what it is, and the interplay is so important, right?
May I come in here?
Sure.
To recognize the opposite action and to really do the balancing act is a very difficult proposition. How do we recognize what is that is driving you, and also how to recognize what is the action which is going to nullify and not accentuate your karma? That's a very difficult thing. Any inputs regarding this?
I just feel it's an impossible situation. That's why you have to, hold on to a perfect master.
Yes.
That example of Hitler Baba had given is also a very strange example if you really think of it,
Yes.
And so, I mean,
Sorry, what's that example? Could you?
Never nullified in that
Samira,
sense.
you should get closer to the mic. Your audio is very feeble. You have to repeat that example of Hitler.
Yeah.
Can you just speak up?
Yeah, I remember reading about the example of Hitler which Baba has given, where he is such, for me, he would be somebody so evil. But according to Baba uses him as a way of liberating souls to some extent, So sometimes what we perceive as something very wrong or really bad is nothing. There's nothing in our hands, basically. So there's nothing we can change. It's only our ego which plays a game, where you feel you can do something, but I don't think, really speaking, one can do anything about it. It's karmic to a large extent.
Yeah, so actually it's complicated by what he brought out, right? This interplay of opposites and is influenced by your will as well. For the first time he's bringing the concept of the will, or what he's saying, your innermost feeling. So if you let that also be a variable in that decision making, it makes it very complicated. As Mama said, it's very difficult to
understand. It's just pure
to pick up the right. Yeah.
I can make a comment here.
Sure.
When you look at the big picture of life, actually, when we have read God Speaks, you can imagine that the whole duality starts from the whim.
Correct.
Infinite consciousness and infinite unconsciousness. So, my understanding of this whole process, of course, Baba has said it very clearly. All of us will understand this whole creation, preservation, dissolution process, our whole life, everything in our own unique way. And but what is interesting out here is it's almost like a soap opera, because he says this is a divine dream. And even when the avatar comes down, he comes with a pre-scripted plan. And also, growing up, I felt that before coming to Baba, we have been conditioned to think of opposites, good and bad, pleasure and pain, and so on and so forth. But after I read Baba, what attracted me most about Baba was he said good and bad is like goodness, and lesser degree of goodness is bad. Okay, there is nothing like, it is just an imagination of the mind. But also when you look at physics, the laws of matter, you will see protons, electrons, matter, antimatter. For every fundamental particle in particle physics, there is an opposite particle. So we have to go beyond this duality. And the fact of the matter is this creation, this awareness of creation is only in the waking state. So we are only challenged in the daily 16 hours of our waking state about this whole concept of creation and opposites of duality. And we kind of think that it's 24 hours all the time. It's not. It's only in the 16 hours of our waking state. And in the 8 hours, when we have deep sleep, if our quality of life is good, we have sound sleep state. But if our quality of life in our waking state is not good, then we have all kinds of dreams and hallucinations. And again, during dreaming, we feel it's real. So in the summary of it is, to me, we are all trying to wake up in this waking dream to go beyond duality. So that's it.
No, only problem is in a day-to-day situation, when you are posed with some question, what I should do at this point of time, or for this problem, or for this situation, it is very difficult to decide the right path after all this learning. That is what I am trying to.
Yeah, impossible. Yeah, it's impossible.
Impossible.
No, I think
I-
a lot of it has to do with our conditioning. The key thing that I picked up in what Kama said is our growing up, right? Our growing up has always been about morality. The idea of what is socially accepted as good, socially accepted as wrong. And that's the lens we constantly see our actions as well. We see it through that lens. So take that example of the cow. If that question was posed to me, I will say it is a sin. That's my morality, right? Till Baba explained it the way he did, my instant gut reaction would have been it is a wrong thing to have done. Whatever said and done, she shouldn't have stolen the milk from that thing. But then it's very difficult as to make that call and put it in day-to-day practice. Again, I use the technique of drawing Baba into that, right? So try
No,
to
but it's, yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, if suppose you have a child and that child is being raped in front of you, okay, what would you do? Would you just stand and watch, or would you try and defend?
Protect.
Because it is so same way. I mean, if you are going to defend that child and hit somebody, it's as then that's a negative thing. So sometimes you just have to leave it to Baba. What he does in order he moves without his this thing. So it's better to just go with the flow and take his name in some way, and you have to live.
True.
One point that Karthik made, which I want to expound, is, as he said, Baba has said that try to live your life as if I'm in front of you all the time. What
Every
would you
time.
do? I found that amazing. Such a simple way
Simple,
of,
but
So to answer Doc Mama's question about how to respond or react to a particular situation, is that it is a very unique process. And one of the things I have learned is that every situation is unique and it has a unique solution. There is no template, because life is always changing. The universal law of nature is impermanence. So every moment is unique by itself, and we have to use our wisdom and intuition to intelligently respond to that situation.
Yes, that is the crux of all the learning. So that is the challenge we are forced to every moment in life. So it's a continuous process of learning.
Yes.
so I think one parallel. I've gotten bad at it. I have to bring it to more practical usage. When you're at work, when something goes beyond your scope of decision making or your scope of authority, you go to a superior and say, hey, I give up, please decide on what to be done here. If we can bring Baba into every step of our life in that
Yeah.
manner, in surrender, and say that, hey, I am not, help me make the right decision here, am I doing the right thing, and leave it to him. And and the best part about that is, in the office example, after that, whatever decision is taken, you don't have any guilt or any fear. In the same way, if we can do it by Baba making that decision and Baba being part of every moment of your life, then you actually remove that burden and fear and guilt and anxiety about what happens from that decision. I put it in very good practice for a long time. I've left it. So thank you, Baba, for reminding me about this, and I will bring that back, because it's then you become Viv Richards on the field, right? So you just walk in and hit the ball, fully aware that there's nothing to fear, right? Every ball is either a sixer or you get bowled. You don't have any stress. So I think that's a little technique that we can use.
Sorry to interrupt. To expound on what Karthik just said, in Baba's My Wish, he says, do not shirk your responsibilities, attend faithfully to your worldly duties, but keep always in the back of your mind that all this is Baba's.
Yes.
When you feel happy, think Baba wants me to be happy. When you suffer, think Baba wants me to suffer. Be resigned to every situation and think honestly and sincerely, Baba has placed me in this situation. And to extrapolate that in discourses, you will come across a very important phrase which I love. It's called the provisional working ego. So I won't go into that right now, but I will send it on the post. So what Karthik was saying is basically what we call as the provisional working ego. Yeah, Baba.
Okay, interesting. My idea is also linked to something I mentioned earlier. It gives one, the individual soul, the freedom in action, freedom in space action, right? So you, once you are able to reconcile to that in every moment of your waking life, you get actually freedom in action. So a spiritual journey also makes you think of, oh, should I do action at all? Out of this fear of making the right action, right? So that's not the joy, that's not the objective of spirituality. The objective of spirituality is to get to freedom in action. So your action should not bind you. Your action should not make you fearful or anxious, right? So that's another way of looking at it. Sorry, I think we're just rambling, maybe. So we'll go to interplay of souls. How are we doing on time? Yeah. So anyway, we stretch a little on Saturdays and Sundays, so we'll keep going. Interplay of souls. On the interplay of souls and their resilient opposition, much has been said by scientists, psychologists, philosophers, moralists, spiritualists, mystics, saints, and seers, as well as by Tom, Dick, and Harry. They differ sharply in their appraisal of the significance of this trans-subjective relationship, and certainly in their attitude towards it. But none of them has treated the intersubjective life with indifference. By man's heritage from the initial whim from the eternal beyond, his consciousness is constrained to move within the opposites of I and you. And this juxtaposition circumscribes the depths to which man may fall, as well as the heights that he may scale. The you is a sort of alter ego or another self within self, but the awareness of the you is of necessity a challenge to the enclosing of the self within self. It is an effective check on the introversion or the inward withdrawal of consciousness into a subjective vacuity. There are many urges which draw the soul out powerfully and link it up with other souls in such a manner that it becomes impossible for the soul to take an uncompromisingly separatist stand. Let us take a few examples. Jealousy keeps the mind mind-heart whirling on some other soul. Revenge also can clasp the soul object in its arms with a gusto that safeguards against a possible relapse into a separatist subjective vacuity. And the capacity of fear to keep the mind-heart pinned upon the object causing fear is too well known to need special mention. Felt duality, in its multitudinous aspects, holds the mind in the grip of a variegated interplay of souls. However, the oppressiveness of sex-tinged relationship is more subtle than all the rest. It pierces into the very being of the separatist soul, exploding it from within like a time bomb. But it always flies off at a tangent to the other soul and is stamped with a patent failure in soul alchemy. Though sex consciousness clasps its opposite with an outgoing fervor, it augments duality instead of sublating it, and the soul continues to be arrested within the spell of the felt other. The invincible other is a constant companion of sex-driven consciousness and is felt as the other. In deepest fulfillment, the sex-tinged opposition suddenly brings to the surface an equally deep frustration which is latent in itself. Even in its most refined and directed form, it does not succeed in sublating duality. In fact, despite appearances to the contrary, it is perhaps the most trenchant of the separatories which obtain in the confused psyche. At all psychic levels, sex consciousness creates the sex opposites and their game of hide and seek, gain and loss, conquest and surrender, love and hate, frustration and fulfillment. At its best, it may pierce the assertive separatism of the soul, but it is never able to relieve it. Its rare moment of evanescent banishment of separatism are always followed by its accentuation in a more formidable form. What sublates all forms of duality is untethered love. Untethered love neither allows you to fall back into a subjective vacuity, nor does it throw you at the mercy of the felt other. It relieves you from the harassing interplay of the felt duality of I and you. Among the psychic separatories which create and sustain the multicolored duality of I and you, none is more formidable than that of the sex drive. The sex opposites, which are its creations, find themselves helplessly caught up in the game of illusion, being unable to separate from each other or really to unite with each other. The multicolored interplay of souls and the variegated opposition of I and you persist until, through the grace of some enlightened one, the soul gets initiated into the untethered love, which is free from every tinge of duality. Prior to this relieving fulfillment, every soul has to suffer the juxtaposition of I and you for countless lives. By the logic of the situation, every soul is driven to gather experiences of both sexes, sometimes incarnating in the male form and sometimes in the female form, sometimes tethered at one end of the transsubjective opposition and sometimes at the other end. The soul dramatizes within its own psyche the interplay of soul opposites by whom it is confronted until it gets established in the relief of non-differentiating and untethered love. Such love can understand the I as well as you as being its own illusory creations, rising from itself and disappearing within itself to find the ineffable fulfillment of the eternal beyond. Very interesting topic, and I think very different exposition on the interplay of souls, and I think I found it to be very useful. We can stop here. And
I can add some
discuss.
interesting inputs here.
Sure.
Especially now, here in our group discussion, we have both males and females, and we know the challenges that we have faced with so-called sexual duality.
Mm-hmm.
But I will read something. I think earlier I have mentioned this, but this will complement to what we have already read.
Okay.
It says, In qualities of the heart, women are usually superior to men, and in qualities of the head and will, men are usually superior to women. The interesting point is that the same soul excels in the qualities of the heart or in the qualities of the head and will, according to whether it takes an incarnation in a female or male form. The alternate development of specific spiritual qualities goes on through the alternation between the male and female forms until the development is all sided. Since male and female incarnations are equally necessary for self knowledge, it is not right to look upon one as being more important than the other. Though there are differences between the nature of the respective facilities afforded by them, they are both indispensable. The soul must go through male incarnations as well as female incarnations if it is to have that richness of experience, which is a condition of attaining the realization that the soul in itself is beyond all forms of duality, including the accentuated duality based on sex. Before the soul is set free from all sanskaras, it assumes numerous male forms and numerous female forms. If the soul were to incarnate only in male forms or only in female forms, its experience would remain one sided and incomplete. The duality of experience can be overcome only through understanding, and the understanding of experience is only partial as long as it moves within the limits of only one of the two opposites. Unity of the subject and object of experience is unattainable as long as there is in the object any aspect or element not fully covered by one's own experience, and this applies particularly to sexual duality. To be free from attachment to the opposite sex is to be free from domination of the sex of the body in which the soul has incarnated itself, thereby annihilating the majority of those sanskaras that compel the soul to identify itself with the body. The transcending of sexual duality does not in itself amount to the overcoming of all duality, but it certainly goes a long way toward facilitating the complete transcendence of duality in all its forms. On the other hand, it is equally true that the problem of sexual duality is a part of the problem of duality as such. Its complete solution comes when the wider problem of all duality is solved through divine love, in which there is neither I nor you, neither man nor woman. The purpose of male and female incarnations is the same as the purpose of evolution itself. It is to enable the soul to arrive at its own undivided and indivisible existence. Jai Baba.
Super.
This is from where you have read?
This is from the Reincarnation and Karma, part 5 in Discourses, page number. I will send it's on page.
Once again,
320.
we'll be reading that later.
Yeah, we'll be reading that, yes.
Yeah. So it's very complementary to what you just read, So I
Correct.
thought it will add.
No, I was reminded of this. I think you explained this to us in God Speaks. So I was reminded of that when we were reading the interpret itself.
Correct.
Very good, very relevant.
I have a joke on that. This guy Summers, who was the head of Harvard, okay,
Mhm.
and he got chucked out because of his making a comment that men are probably superior to women in certain scientific discipline. Okay? And I think it became such a big furor. And I thought to myself, I wish he had this particular chapter of the significance of male and female incarnations. And if we had showed that, people would understand that there is, there are different facilities that are available that are unique to both either sex. That's what this particular part is about.
No, but man in his greed and his use of science is taking it to extreme lengths, right? So we are now questioning Whether we have the whole thing about how you can change your sex and do all kinds of modifications, goes against the grain of what it's wired for, right? So in that sense, I think we are using the will in the wrong way and using science in the wrong way.
The fact is, the soul has to take male or female incarnations in many lifetimes. But I think the $1 billion question is, why is the avatar only male?
Yeah, that was what
That was lingering in the mind, actually. So.
Yeah,
Everybody.
And also
I've
most
been
Sadhgurus.
thinking about this also. I said this is not fair.
And there is an answer for
I
that.
thought
If
you might
said-
have an answer, but I didn't want to ask the question. I'm surprised you don't.
No,
And
actually,
another thing that also bothers me sometimes about Baba is why would he segregate men and women? I mean, if
Yeah.
it's difficult for me to deal with that part of his being. Yeah, so
I can answer that question. I think that I will use Oscar Wilde's quote. I can resist everything but temptation.
Yes, that's
So
true.
I think even an avatar's presence, suppose Baba, let's say hypothetically, had allowed the men and women mandali to mingle, we would have been they would have been attracted to each other, and Baba's work would not be done. I'm
no,
telling
but
you, it's a fact.
then putting these things between the two sexes is also his job. Then he's done it, no? Then he should alter the way things are instead of segregating them.
We have women's liberation now. Women are head of, in India we have a lot of women taking leading positions. So actually there is a big surge in women's emancipation in today's
I
world.
would say there is more to do. There should be male liberation because that's where the,
Can you extrapolate on that? What does that
subjugation
mean?
is coming. I mean, if you guys don't think you are superior, then there is nothing to emancipate women about.
But there is a reason for that. When we went through evolution, when we went from the orangutans and the gorillas and chimpanzees to become men, we were cavemen. So the woman and the children had to live in the cave and be with themselves in a community, and the men had to go hunt for days, and you didn't know whether they're going to come or not.
Yeah, the thing is,
So
you
it
must
all comes
realize
from
that time
that.
is over. You have to
Blame it
change.
on Baba, I mean, like this whole divine script, even the avatar being in a male form is the divine script. I don't think it had to do with anything. It has to do with I asked Baba, why did you create two genders? Why not just create one sex? Problem
Yes.
solved.
Problem
That's
solved.
true.
You know, he creates this Maya, then he says, you come out of it, then this won't work. We don't know. He's let us. I think today my biggest takeaway is what would you do if Baba was in this room? Let that be your guiding factor. Then I think we
Perfect.
can.
If we are able to do that every breath of our life,
I think that looks like will get us somewhere. And another takeaway was it is the intent that defines the content of your growth. Intent. I think you get evaluated on intent, not the action so much.
Yes.
Yeah,
These
that's
are
true.
my takeaways today.
Very good summary. Yes.
But
Yeah.
okay.
And I hope this group is not still thinking you are cavemen.
If you don't mind, just to extrapolate on what Romita said, intention is correct, but I have this is something I use in my presentation, what we call as the 80-20 rule. We all know that 80% people are incompetent in any organization, material or spiritual, because they are all in the wrong jobs. Because I believe that every human being has potential, but our education system does not awaken the potential of the individual. So we have all kinds of incompetent people all over the place. But also in the 80-20 rule, what I call as three things. One is right intention, second is right process, and third is right execution. So let me describe that. Now, 80% people have no intention and no process, what I call as the herd mentality. You just follow what the others are doing, Now, other 20%, one person probably have right intention, they have the right process or formulation, and maybe right action or execution. Now, the other 19%, if you divided it by 2, 9.5% have right intention, wrong process, and the other 9.5% have wrong intention and right process. This is my observation of the world. That is why it's very difficult to, climb Mount Everest or even become God realized or, go through this mukti, manonash and, moksha state, so it's a tough process.
Then
So-
every enterprise is dependent on only one person, as per your logic.
Absolutely. It's,
Actually, it's a fact.
I think our enterprise is dependent on Baba, so we are
That's
on
true.
cruise mode.
Yes.
I'll give you another statistic. Out of the 7 billion people, now it's 7.7, I calculated that only 700,000 or 7 lakh people are probably aware of Baba. That's 0.01%. Imagine.
No, because we are the cream of the crop, so that's how it is.
I think that's again.
Is that a
boosting our
little
own
bit of
ego.
spiritual ego, Namita?
Not little bit, complete. Remember, Baba is in this room.
Yes. Sorry, Samira, we didn't hear you. Repeat that. You
No,
said
I
something.
think that's again boosting our own ego.
That's what I said.
In His divine will, we submit.
Yes,
So,
that's true.
if it is coming, He is going to erase it as well. So we
Yeah.
are on cruise mode.
Yeah, we have hardly any choice in any matter. In any case, that's what I
Actually,
found.
this after reading all these books, I don't think there's a quick fix to it. Is you get there by His will,
Yeah.
and yeah. So
No shortcut.
another good thing I like about Baba's teaching is even the worst sinner has a chance. In other religions, they say you sin and that's the end of your. That's something which is which I find very positive, that there is hope for everyone
Yeah.
under Baba's care. So
No, I think that's true, Namita. But I think we must have lived as Hindus, Muslims, God knows what all in our previous births, and He must have said, "Oh my God, you don't know what to do. So let me now come as an avatar and give you all the."
yeah, I believe that as well, because I think he says, okay, as Allah, I said all this. Oh my God, they misinterpreted it. As Krishna, I said all this. So now he says, now let me make a syllabus where all these streams come in, and at least these dummies can understand a bit better than what they have.
I think we must have been really useless, and that's why He's decided to kind of say, "Chalo,
Yeah, I think
there's
so.
no other respite for these guys."
He says, इनसे कुछ नहीं हो सकता. Now let me do it.
Nice.
Yeah,
So,
but
Samira, you are in Bombay or in Pune?
I'm in Pune. I stay in
Pune.
Pune. I used to be in Bombay all these years,
Okay.
and then I moved to Pune 2 years back. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. All right then. So, anything else before we wind up?
we hope in August all of us can go to Mehrabad.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. I think that's a good idea.
That's
Let's
my
plan.
intent. So the content of your life depends on your intent.
Yes. It depends on Baba's intent and
That's
right
true.
now Corona's intent.
Yes.
Corona symptom.
I guess it will open up silence.
He is Corona Nidan, so he will take us out of this coronavirus.
We were not able to hear whoever that was.
No worries. Jai Baba.
Okay,
Jai
Jai
Baba.
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 Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Okay.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.